Hey guys, how you going? So today on BKRsport, it is time again for another season review. We are going through all 17 teams in the NRL and giving you what I think in regards to their positives, in regards to their negatives, going into next year, this year, obviously coming into this year. I really want to get in depth into, you know, their signings and contracts and their ladder rises, pouring against everything in between, man. So if you haven't already been watching this series, we've actually absolutely slapped down pretty much every team, well, every team below them, except for one team, which we'll get into in a second. But we've done the Tigers, the Rabbitohs, the Parramatta of the Squeals, the Parramatta Eels, the Titans, the Warriors, the Broncos, Dragons, Dolphins, Raiders, and also the Newcastle Knights. And today, obviously, we are moving further into that top 8. And this is actually probably going to be a pretty positive video, to be completely honest with you. There will be some criticism, for sure. Obviously, guys, in the comment section, drop your beliefs, drop your opinions. If you agree with me, disagree with me, slightly agree, slightly disagree, feel free to jump down there into the comment section and let me know exactly what you think. But obviously today, guys, we get into the surprise packet of 2024, and that was the Canterbury Bulldogs. What a fantastic year. I'm going to label this from the start here and say, what an unbelievable year here for the Canterbury Bulldogs that nobody truly believed. And a lot of Bulldogs fans didn't even believe that they would have as good of a year as they did have. Now, obviously, we're doing this after the first week of the finals, so that means that they're already gone, or this might even be coming out actually after the second week of finals. But they were out after week 1 in a cracker of a game against the Manly Seagulls that obviously we will talk about. But look, this, regardless of what I'm about to say here today, when I go through the draw, when I go through the signings and all this type of stuff, this is a miraculous year here for the Dogs, because even Dogs fans, they hoped and they believed, but they didn't trust that the Dogs were going to be a top 8 team. And I can tell you right now, most other support bases and most other fans and big-time organisations had them down the bottom 4. I think Fox League even had them for last. I think I had them for 3rd last or something like that. So, look, I think in hindsight, it's all well and good to go back and have a laugh at those people and people like myself who didn't believe in the Bulldogs. But I think that as well, now that the season has come to a close, we've got that to look back at, whilst at the time, there wasn't anything to trust, there wasn't anything to go back off, and, you know, there was warranted valuable opinions in regards to why the Dogs probably should struggle throughout the year, which obviously wasn't the case. And again, they've had such a fantastic year, but at the time, before the season, you don't have that hindsight to look back on, and most people had the same collective opinion that the Bulldogs probably weren't going to be a top 8 team, or even competing for the top 8 this year, despite the fact they did make a whole bunch of changes, but the recent years didn't suggest that there was going to be a dramatic uprising. However, you know, to benefit the Bulldogs here, you go back to last year, the Warriors of 2023 were a dramatic rise. 2022 was the Cowboys, a dramatic rise. 2021, there was like Manly. You know, so I can't think of 2020. If a comment wants to let me know who 2020 was, if there was, please feel free to. But look, overall, you know, they were the team that got their fan base going, and they were the team that gave a little bit more in regards to the trust. Obviously, it's 1 year, which we will talk about. However, you've just got to be happy to be back in the conversation again. You've got to be happy to have gone from nothing all the way up to something. Now, let's get into the ladder positioning here. So, obviously, they finished in 6th position, which got them a home final. Now, yes, they did lose that game. However, it got them into the conversation on a serious level where people were like, well, this could be the Smokies of the competition. This could be the Smokies. And to compare with previous years, so in 2024, they finished in 6th position. In 2023, they finished all the way down there in 3rd last. In 2022, they finished in 12th. And in 2021, they finished as the Wooden Spooners in 16th position. This was obviously before the Dolphins did come into the competition. In 2020, the Dogs also, I don't believe, did anything. Yeah, no, came 2nd last. The only team that obviously came below them was the Brisbane Broncos, and that was because of a late season win to the Dogs. They could have easily been a team that got back-to-back wooden spoons. That was in a shortened year, as you can see here by the round 20. But the point that I'm making here is that 2020 was obviously awful. 2021 and 2022 and 2023 were down that bottom area of the table, and even their best year in 2022 was a 12th position. And then obviously in 2024, they rise completely out of that bottom 4 area and never really looked like a team that was going to be even around that at any stage, besides maybe after round 1, which we'll talk about. But, you know, from the outset of the season, the Bulldogs started off, you know, with a new aura, a new sense of something's going to happen, right? And they do have a strong fan base that you do like to see pumping, you do like to see, you know, getting loud and passionate for their team. So with everything being said there, it's been a dramatic rise based off of those last 4 years. And we won't go back prior to that, but they hadn't made the finals in 8 years. So add another 4 years on top of what I just showed you, right? So they came into this year, they won, oh no, sorry, that's in round 20. So in round 27, after the season had finished, they came in with 14 wins and 10 losses. So to compare that again with 2023, they had 7 wins and 17 losses, right? So that means that they have had double their wins, and obviously the majority less losses as well, but double their wins this season. And it wasn't based off of attack. It was completely based on defense, which is the structure that you do seriously need to really build your team around. I understand this team, the Cowboys, are an attacking team, and they are in the second week of finals. By this point, you would have obviously seen whether the Cowboys beat the Sharks or not. I'm filming this on the same day as that Cowboys-Sharks game. However, this team bases it off attack. This team based off defense. But I do think if these two teams had have played each other in the finals, I know what happened at the back end of the year, right? I do understand that. Oh, so maybe not, actually. Maybe I wouldn't say the Bulldogs beat the Cowboys. But then again, that is because they do start to falter late on throughout the season. But the point of the matter is that I would say that this team, I would have been more confident to win the premiership than this team. And I know that's strange to say, but I'm just saying from my personal belief. I would have been more out of that belief because defense wins premierships, right? So let's talk about that. 433 points given up. Now, they were at one stage, middle to late of the season, they were number 1 before falling back a little bit, but they didn't fall off too heavily. The best team in the competition defensively were the Penrith Panthers on 394 against, so about 40 odd, 45 odd, whatever, from the Bulldogs. And the Sharks actually surprised everyone and got 431. So the Bulldogs ended up in 3rd best defense across the competition, which was much more superior than pretty much every other top 8 team. Seagulls, Knights, definitely not the Cowboys. Only a little bit better than the Roosters and a little bit better than the Storm. But the point is that their defense could hold it with the best, and we'll see that in the draw. Their defense could hold it with the best, which showed their plus 96 points differential, which was obviously well better than the Knights, better than the Cowboys as well, not too far off of Manly, but still significantly behind that top 4, which is why throughout the season I was saying to Dogs fans, like, who cares about making the top 4? Just solidify your spot in the 8. Just solidify yourself as a competitive team in that top 8, and then try and get one of those smoky runs at the back end of the year, and especially in the finals, right? Shouldn't necessarily happen, but the point is that you don't need to focus on just going straight up there. Obviously, you want that, you love that, you would love to see yourself in the top 4, but I just didn't think that was an emphasis, right? So 433 defensive points against is very, very good. That is unreal stuff there from the Dogs, especially when you consider in last year, the Dogs conceded 769 points. 769 points. It's not exactly double, but it's close enough to double. 769 points to 2024, where they gave up only 433. So double that is obviously 866. But it's close enough, man. Like, that's worse than all the defenses this year. The Tigers with the worst defense had 750. You, last year, had the worst defense by a country mile. And this year, if you had that same defense, would have still been the worst behind the West Tigers. So it just shows the dramatic improvement in regards to how they played their footy and their mentality coming into the year. What let them down, however, was their attack of 529. The only team in the top 8 that they beat out there was the Newcastle Knights, which we've gone into in depth. And then you go into the bottom 8, like everybody else is pretty convincingly, actually really convincingly above them. Manly, about over 100. Cowboys, 130 odd. Better. Sharks, 130 odd better. Roosters like 200 better. About only 50 or so more for the Panthers. And then about 140 odd for, 160 odd nearly, for the Storm of the Dogs. So that's what let them down significantly this year. And you go back into their attack down here, they finished below the Dolphins in attack. The Dragons weren't too far off them and had their issues. The Broncos scored more points than them. The Warriors didn't score that much worse than them. But the big one here is the Parramatta Eels. The Eels scored 561 points, which is 32 more points than the Dogs scored. So I'm not telling you something you don't know here. However, I think the Bulldogs had, what, the fifth worst attack in the game? Knights, Raiders, 529, Dragons, Warriors. Oh, so probably about 7th or 8th worst attack in the game. Probably about 7th or 8th worst attack in the game. So really around that mid-range of the pack. But if they had have been able to slap down some better scores here to pull that the points for up, I tell you what, they would have been a team to be reckoned with this year. If the Bulldogs knew how to attack on a significant level, this is so good, which they've obviously focused on. This is so good that they would have been a genuine premiership contender. They would have been. Because this shows absolutely premiership credentials. However, the thing that I'll say going into next year is that this could have been the emphasis so that they build that foundation defense, and then you can work on your attack. Your attack, you can always work on. The defense is something that you really need to just fortify. Right, so we'll see in 2025 if they can maintain this, especially considering the massive fluctuation that we saw from last year. But the players they brought in did obviously help in regards to that. And again, they only finished the 2 points short there of the Cowboys. So, and that doesn't mean a great deal. It just means instead they would have played the Knights, and they would have beaten the Knights. The Bulldogs would have beat the Knights, as they did late on in the year. Where was it? Did I miss it? Did I miss the Knights here? Or maybe they didn't. But they did flog them at one point. They did flog them. Oh, it was the middle part of the year, wasn't it? Oh, yeah, 32-2 there. And earlier on in the year... oh, they might have only just played each other once. No, twice. They flogged them both times. So I'm just throwing it out there. The Bulldogs would have been making it into the week 2 of the finals had they got that extra spot there and got that 1 extra win. And then 2 extra wins, their points differential was not going to be good enough to go above the Sharkies or obviously the Roosters. So this was absolutely viable, and Manly were at the time anyway, like I said, haven't seen it yet, but coming into the finals, Manly were the most dangerous team in that bottom 4 of the top 8, in my personal opinion. So that's why you obviously saw the Bulldogs lose, Manly win, and I just feel like they get that 1 more win. They do go through to the next week, which they would have played the Sharks, if I'm not mistaken. They would have played the Sharks, because Cowboys Knights, Cowboys beat the Knights, so Cowboys play the Sharks. Yes, so the Bulldogs would have ended up playing against the Sharks. There is a viable chance there, and it's not saying Manly wasn't a viable chance, but it's a viable chance to progress all the way to a preliminary final, right? Where I don't think either of these 2 teams lose. Hopefully this is out by then, but I just can't see either of these 2 teams not being in the grand final. But yeah, 1 win, and they would have been in a red-hot opportunity to progress through an easier side of the draw in the Knights than the Sharks. So that's something that is a little bit in hindsight, but I'm just throwing it out there. Bulldogs 1 more win, you probably would have gone further because this was the most dangerous team in Manly in the competition, in my personal opinion, in that 5 through 8 range. Now let's move now to the draw, where obviously this isn't great to end the back end of the year, but obviously let's get to the start of the year to really see the positives that they really did bring. Because you see here, this is an awful start, which gave people the wrong impression and set the foundation for the mentality that people had that the Bulldogs weren't going to be that good this year. Regardless of how they finished up, that snapshot right there is really poor, especially when you look back in hindsight at the Eels and how their season went, nearly got the wooden spoon. 26-8 to the Eels, and then 25-6 to the Sharks. Now, the Sharkies obviously did finish in top 4. They were very up and down throughout the year, but they did finish in the top 4 there. So that one's kind of forgivable. This one isn't really forgivable, and I don't really know what happened there, but maybe that's just a point in emphasis of why the Eels struggled as bad as they did this year, because when they had injuries, they just could not cover the depth in that position. So an awful start. And then they come into this period here. Actually, you know what? We'll even use their first 4 games as a snapshot here, all the way through. So they beat my Titans 32-0. That's an obvious one. You know, I think the Titans were favourites coming into this game, but both teams hadn't won a single game yet at Belmore, and the Bulldogs were just simply a much better team than the Gold Coast Titans this year, and that's just a fact, you know. I may be a Titans fan, but I can admit to you right now, the Titans just weren't good enough this year besides that little spurt. We've already done their review anyway. But the point matter is, that's a really, really big win, but then to fall here and lose to the Rabbitohs, again, that's second last there in the Rabbitohs, and then that's third last there on the Eels, looking back at it. So this first 4 games really doesn't make a great deal of sense on that marker, and at the time, this was a surprise too. It was a surprise on how significant the victory was. So the Bulldogs did not start their season off greatly. If they had have won just this game, or won this game, they would have gotten that spot against the Knights instead of the Manly Sea Eagles. So I do think that your ladder positioning on not being higher does come down to that first 4 games, because you should have won that game and you should have won the Eels game. I'm okay with you losing that game. But there you go, you know, and this is a good point in regards to your defense, but you still go at 26, 25, and 20. So your defense hadn't clicked by round 4. It had not clicked. You were still giving up a decent amount of points. And then even here, when you go and play the Roosters and you beat them 30 to 26, this was a worrying game because, yes, you won, but with that being said, the Roosters had like 2 players down. You were leading like 30-0 or something at one stage. You were flogging them, and the Roosters came home like a train. Didn't win, but they had excuses in that game. So that's why a lot of opposition fans didn't really look at that game and say, oh, yeah, you beat the Roosters. You know, like you did, but in the same sense, there was context involved behind that one there. So your first 5 games, after round 5 on the ladder, you were sitting in 13th position, with 2 wins and 3 losses, which is what you want as a minimum from your first 5 games. You want that as your minimum. You don't want this. you don't want that. But after first 5 games, 2 and 3 is okay, right? Because you're even looking at the Panthers who are 3 and 2, so it's only 1 win, give or take. But again, you should have beaten the Eels and you should have beaten the Rabbitohs, in my personal opinion. But all these teams down here, Roosters obviously come, and see, that's another one. They came 3rd place with a 2 and 3 record. So this is, it's okay, but you should have gotten at least one of those wins, yeah? But then you move down here and you get into this period where you start, this is probably your last, no, you know what? This is the one that really clicks it on for me. It's not the Roosters game. The Storm game, you were so close. And arguably you were the better team in this one. Arguably the Dogs were the better team. The Storm just find a way to win. And that's their thing this year, is that regardless if they're good or not good, because they actually haven't been that great to watch, and they're not that great, they still win. That's why they're first. And yet they just dominated the competition from grinding out results in games that they should win, they shouldn't win, doesn't matter. Ask the Warriors, ask the Titans as well. Like, there are games that the Storm throughout the year, on a frequent basis, will just win regardless of how bad they played or average they played. And the Dogs played better. And I think that changed a lot of mentality. And they also only gave up 16 points there, right? So that changed the mentality. And then you had a really beneficial period here where you had the Knights, who was a winnable team. You had a bye, and then the Tigers, which is a winnable team. And you obviously beat those 2 guys quite well, 36 to 12 and 22 to 14. So I think this Storm loss is actually a significant benefit there for the Dogs rather than a negative. I know the L is next to the name, but that sets up this next stanza, which then means going into this Panthers game, and this is an okay period, but going into round 10, you've now gone from being in 13th position to being up there in the top 8. You're up there in the top 8 there with a 4 and 4 record, which is good. And you've had 1 bye, so a couple of teams are still above you here. But the fact of the matter is that you've put yourself back into a winnable range. You put yourself back into a winnable area. So you're happy with that. You go in, you just lose the Panthers. You gave it a good crack. This was a try that one of those tries the Dogs were scored very, very late. But overall, you were happy with that. This isn't one that you probably want to be losing there at Magic Round. So your first 11 rounds of the season, yes, you can snapshot really important parts. Like, yes, you can snapshot really important games. But after just 11 rounds, you actually were in 11th place with a 4 and 6 record, which was still showing why people didn't believe in you this year. It's still showing why you didn't believe in you this year. And you go here to round... Oh, no, well, actually, because I know what happens next. But they come home like a train. And they do really, really well against teams that you would expect them to, though. All right, so you go past that Raiders game. And they smack the Dragons 44 to 12. Big, big game there for them. They smack the Knights there 32 to 2. And then this one really adjusts their mindset, because they beat their biggest rivals, who obviously whooped them earlier on in the year, 26 to 8. They go and beat their biggest rivals in the last seconds of the game, which is kind of like a turning of the tide in context of the Bulldogs to the Eels season and last season, and how the Eels have been the last 4 or 5 years compared to how the Dogs have been. This was a good turning of the tide performance there, and then they go into the bye with that. So that last seconds win provides a bit of confidence going into the bye. Right, I know that right after this, you then lose to the Roosters 26 to 8, which is a really, really strong loss. But then after round 16, after round 16, you've then gone from 11th and you put yourself up to 6th. So you go up high and then you drop down low and then you go up high again and then you just don't seem to move from this area. You just seem to be consistent from this period on after that Roosters loss. After that Roosters loss here, you just seem to find a way to win, doing something that the Storm would normally do. And that regardless of if you were good or not, you would just... Because this game here, Toby Rudolph was the biggest benefactor to your team. And this game here, it was a very controversial win. The Warriors probably should have won that with a penalty in the last 6 minutes or so. But the point is that you won them. And you kicked 2 field goals. And that created the hype. And your fan base needs the hype. It needs it. I nearly said hype. I don't know if you're a small fan base in regards to hype, but in regards to hype, your fan base thrives off of that. And 2 field goals like that really get the juices flowing. Really get the blood flowing. And that goes again into a bye. So that then puts you into position after round 19 that you're pretty damn well confident right now in 5th position that although you're close to the Dragons and still relatively close to the Knights and whatnot outside of the 8, the point is that you're starting to genuinely believe that this is the year that you are going to make the finals and be competitive. That's why this is so important, and I would say those 2 wins right there are some of, if not the most important parts of your season. Yes, you go and lose to the Cowboys here. That's okay considering their position this year. It was a real tough and close game, and this is a massive run home. Massive. I'm going to use the entire round 21 through round 27 of your run home. You flog the Broncos 41-16. You then beat the Raiders in a grindy game, again pumping that atmosphere at Belmore Sports Ground. You then go and smack the Dragons in a game that you must win because both those teams were absolutely fighting hard for that top 8 position. You then go and smack another team in the Dolphins who were also fighting desperately hard to make the top 8. The Warriors, you pretty much ended their season. Okay, that's... No, not until round 27. Up until round 25 is what we're going to utilize there. So, in this little stretch here, post that Cowboys loss, and if you want to include that, actually, we'll include it. So, 1, 2, bye. You give yourself that there. No, take the bye out. So, 2, 2-1, 3-1, 4-1, 5-1, 6-1, 7-1. 7-1 in those last few games there. 7-1. So, you are extremely happy with that point, and then after round 25 or 1, you're guaranteed to be making the finals at this point after that little stretch there, and you're on 34 points, and you've separated yourself from the pack, because there was a large pack here. There was a large pack, which makes things really nerve-wracking, and I don't know if the Dogs would have been able to handle the pressure in that regard, which is kind of what we see in a second, but that is huge. However, it set you up for a little bit of unrealistic precedent, except for this one. There's nobody else there. So this team obviously smacked you. That was a good team. This one you got a close win against, who were in a pretty dire point of their year. But the Warriors, the Broncos, the Raiders was another really... This 3-game stretch here sets you up for a top 8 guarantee, really. Because all 3 of the Raiders, Dragons, and Dolphins finish in... Let's go to round 27. Raiders, Dolphins, and Dragons. 9, 10, and 11. All of them could have used one more win. The Raiders definitely could have used one more win. The Dolphins, they would have loved one more win because that would have put them into 8th position as well. And the Dragons, they would have loved one more win because it meant they probably do hold out the Raiders in that last game of the season. So you impacted all 3 of these teams. You impacted all 3 of them. And again, you can also say that you absolutely impacted the Knights season. But with that being said, they at least made the top 8. So, the teams you were playing in that area were nothing spectacular, but these ones were important based on the fact that they were competitive teams. But then, obviously, you've put so much emphasis and put so much effort into just keeping that roll going that then you get whooped by Manly. And that scoreline really makes the Bulldogs look better than they were. And then this scoreline absolutely smacked them. And they were actually undefeated at Accor Stadium at home until this game. And I think that's what broke them. I think this is what broke them here. Because they had this record intact that they could really fortify and solidify with. But Manly broke them. And that's why you also saw here that the Cowboys then doubled the pain. And beat them by a huge margin. Now again, you're now in the finals. Right? But you're coming in off 2 big losses. Like that, the Manly one was a big loss, and then this was even bigger of a loss. And then not only this, you now have to play against Manly again. in the finals, a team that just gave you a big enough loss and were coming right at the right time. So then you get to this one, and although you were the better team for the most part of that game, you just couldn't keep up with it for 80 minutes. You couldn't. This is the game that broke you. And that's what shows by then getting whooped the next week. Yes, there was changes here and there, but at the end of the day, you look at this and you say, the Bulldogs were the better team for the most part, but Manly broke them. And twice. And twice. But you look through all of that draw there, and you say, regardless of how it's finished here and the heartbreak that you suffered at the hands of Talatakuala, it's a fantastic season. Because when you needed to come up trumps the most, you did. And even in close games, you knew how to grind it out, and you also knew how to put scores past teams. Just not as consistently as you would like, because obviously your attack wasn't that fantastic. So your attack mainly came in this period, by the way. Like, if you're looking at it, the only reason your attack has really gotten as high as it did, because you scored 18 against the Cowboys, 41 against the Broncos, 22 against the Raiders, 28 against the Dragons, 30 against the Dolphins, 34 against the Warriors, and then 22 against Manly. So that period there is what's really benefited you attack-wise in regards to your points differential, because other than that, you know, there was 13, 15, 8. There's a couple of ones here, to be fair. There is a couple of ones there. It's actually quite weird that the Bulldogs, yeah, it must have just, it's just that first 10 rounds, man. It's just that first 10 rounds where things hadn't necessarily clicked yet. So overall, positive season regardless of how it finished, because at least they got there and they just have to build on it for next year. But the back end of the year, they did start scoring a few points, so maybe their attack is starting to click right now, and it is a positive going into 2025. Now let's go have a look at their contract situation. So this is a little bit of a worry here. So you got Matt Burton in 2027, Maxi King 2027, you've got Stephen Crichton 2027. You've obviously signed Tupanu here for a few years. Jacob Kiraz and Jacob Preston. So that's all really good. 2026, I would even include in this area. Right, so that's all good. Kiraz, Preston, Tracy, Burton, Maxi King. You could argue Reid Marnie and Crichton. You're banking on this core. You are banking on this core for a few years, and you're not going to let them go. The benefit to this is that you have a lot of room to change with Blake Taff, Blake Wilson. Depends on how you go with Bronson Cherry, but I do feel like he probably stays. You've got room to change. Sleeper Feeder, Hutchinson. I think that's probably a move on at the moment. These two, Torpany and Perham, can do what you want with. You know, you've got plenty of room here to figure out who you want. Obviously, this one's a bit of a situation right now. You've got plenty of room here. And you've got like plenty of room with these guys here that you can decide. You just need to figure out who your 7's going to be, because that's a big issue with the Dogs. So overall, your contract situation's pretty good. You're liking that because your big time players are locked down for a few years. So all you need to do is tinker, and the key tinkering is in regards to if you go with Toby Sexton into the 7 in the future. Because you're not obviously going... This situation is done with Drew Hutchinson. That situation is over. So you either decide to continue on with Toby post-2025, you either continue to decide to go on with him, or you do look to making a play in regards to a half. And I think that's, yeah, because I think Toby was fine, but it just comes down to, you know, yeah, you got, obviously you believe Matt Burton's the 6, you've got a good fullback in Colin Tracy, the 9, Reid Marnie, had a great year, had a better year anyway. So yeah, the 7 is just the one. We had this outlined before the season started, but at least Toby did come on and did get his opportunity and did crack on. But he's got next year to really, really prove himself there as well. So he needs the Bulldogs to really turn up next year, and he needs to be a big part of it. But yeah, I just think the lack of depth in the halfback, like if he goes down, who goes in? You have to go back to Drew Hutchinson, which is what the first 10 games realistically was. You guys decided to have Drew Hutchinson as your halfback in the first 10, and then Toby Sexton really came in and made his mark. So, I'm not sitting here trying to shit on Drew Hutchinson, but I'm just saying the timing does suit, you know, going forward with Tobes and building with Tobes. Because I know he's a good bloke, he's a friend of mine. You know, I know Toby well. He will be passionate for your team. He will be passionate, and we saw that he had a good season with him. Maybe not Nathan Cleary, but he's down with Toby Sexton. He knows what he's doing. And he gives it his best every single game. So, yeah, look, the Bulldogs contract situation is pretty good. Development list-wise, Bailey Hayward, he was sold when he came in. Joseph O'Neill, not too sure about. Josh Papali'i, hear a bit about. Bwasa Famo silly. I don't necessarily believe in as much as others may do. So it's a solid enough development list here. Again, we saw some good stuff out of Bailey Hayward throughout the development. And I hear a lot about this from the noise that the Dogs make. But overall, it's got upside, this development list. It does have upside. It has a lot of upside, and at least Bailey has played a little bit of rugby league football. So has Bwasa, but first grade, at least Bailey has played a decent football in. Yeah, so it's better in regards to the development list. Now, obviously, this is huge. Okay, so remember, guys, this is all based off NRL.com. If things have changed, let me know in the comment section. But I can only go off what I see here, yeah? So the Dogs going into 2024, Bronson Cherry, he returned from his ban, Stephen Crichton from the Panthers, Tracy from the Sharks, Blake Taft from the Rabbitohs, James Salmon from the Panthers, Josh Curran from the Warriors, Drew Hutchinson from the Roosters, Kurt Mann from the Knights, Jake Turpin from the Roosters, Pwasa Famo from the Dolphins, Zane Tetavano from Leeds, and Daniel Saluka-Fafita from the Rabbitohs. Overall, this showed, whether they worked out or not, that they were intent on adjusting where they were. They were intent on making a big splash in the market to change themselves from whatever team they were last year to the team they became this year. This was a success. This was a significant success, which gives this an A+ as it is, realistically, based on Crichton, because he changed the mentality, in my opinion. Tracy was a success. I never really saw this one. I never really thought this was going to be the play, but at least they've got the depth there. This one was okay. This one was a great success. This one didn't necessarily work out, but at least you've got someone to back up Toby. This was a success. This one didn't work out. Haven't seen anything from him. Didn't see anything, and I don't think that was a success. But overall, based off of the fact that they got 3 key players here, and then a 4th key player here, and then a 5th key player in Kurt Mann, this is overall a gigantic success going this year, because it adjusted the way the Bulldogs were playing going forward. You move now into 2024 losses. They got rid of Averillo, because to get all these guys, you have to get rid of some guys. Averillo to the Dolphins. Pungai Jr. retired. Not really, because he went to the Dolphins eventually. Flanagan to the Dragons. Paul Alamotti for the Panthers. Luke Thompson to the Weird Warriors. Corey Waddle to Manly. Braden Burns to the Rabbitohs New South Wales Cup. Declan Casey to the Tigers New South Wales Cup. Michael Gabriel to the Sharks. Raymond Fatala-Mariner to the Dragons. Zach Montgomery was released, and Harrison Edwards to the Cowboys. Overall, this is fine. Overall, Kyle Flanagan wasn't the guy for them. Paul Alamotti has done well at the Panthers, but I can understand why they got rid of him, to be fair. Jake Averillo was a big loss, but in the same sense, it didn't really matter a great deal because you had such a good 2-3-5. Your 2-3-5 was fantastic, and Averillo, surplus to demand, realistically. Like, you have your centers were Jacob Kiraz. Well, 2-3-5 was Josh Adokar. You know, you had Jacob Kiraz, you had Stephen Crichton, and then you also had... geez, I can't even think of who the wingers were. Obviously, I'm going to add in Adokar here, but then again, he was injured for large parts of the year. Kiraz, Bronson Cherry, Stephen Crichton, Jarrell Skelton. But then you add in Adokar, yeah? So overall, there was not a significant need for Jake Averillo. So I understand that. This didn't really matter a great deal. So, yeah, you know, you lost all these players. Raymond Fatala-Mariner did well at the Dragons, but it was time for him to move on, in my opinion. So this is great. This is fantastic. For the most part, success. Success. But that's obvious. Look at how they did this year. And look at the guys that came through. It's as simple as that. It really is as simple as that. Now, this obviously then goes to show that you don't need to make a great deal of signings going into 2025. Again, don't know if this has been updated or not, but Tom Amone from Lee Leopards and Siteli Tupanur from the Sydney Roosters are the Gains, and Jarrell Skelton to the Tigers. You don't really like to see that because obviously he was a good player for you when he came in, young. Tigers get a good one there, but you're fine. You know, you got Blake Wilson, you got a few guys here that can cover. You're okay. It's not a big loss. Tom Amone, I don't know anything about from the Lee Leopards, and Siteli Tupanur is solid enough depth-wise. I don't think that he's realistically going to be a mainstay, a major part of this team, but at least it's signing somebody else who's going to work hard and do their best for the team. Overall, like, there's no real serious complaints about any of this from last year to this year. There's no real serious complaints at all. There's no serious complaints. It's definitely on the significantly positive end comparatively to the significantly negative end that we have seen with some of these from other teams. So yeah, really beneficial. And that's what showed them. That's what showed them to be where they are. Right? And if they had had a better start of the season, they would have been up at the top 4. They would have been. And that's a positive for next year to think like that. That now that you're here and now that you're there, you need to capitalize on that first part of the year. You need to capitalize. And the same issue with the Knights this year. The Bulldogs were better this year than the Knights, but the same issue comes with the Knights because they struggled significantly. Go back and have a look at that review if you need to. So, going into 2025, I am obviously concerned that they are a one-year wonder team because Serraldo has had that big year like Andrew Webster did, and we saw what the Warriors did. We saw, you know, kind of what the Cowboys did last year. We saw the year before that in regards to Manly and whatnot. Overall, you do have that concern, of course. That's normal, right? You can shit on me all you like, but it's simple as that. It's viable to have that concern that they're going to be joining the teams that they've improved to go back down alongside those, right? So I am concerned about that being a one-year wonder kind of team, especially with the complete switcheroo in regards to their defense. But the positive that comes from this is that their games that they really struggled in were the first part of the year, and then they really pumped home strongly from round 10 onwards, realistically, and then obviously fell apart late without that experience. But it showed that they weren't clicked yet. Then they clicked. They got to 6th position, and they can use that momentum going forward. That is the positive there. They do have some solid players. However, you've got to be a little bit wary that other teams now don't think of you as a surprise. They come in with different tactics. They come in with different thought processes, and they play harder against you. Right, which is what you want. Like, you want other teams to play harder against you to really prove yourselves. But that's why you've seen the Warriors, the Cowboys, the Broncos as well. You know, that's why you've seen... Broncos was more of a slow progression. But, you know, that's why you've seen the Cowboys, the Warriors, you know, the Manly Sea Eagles, and go for the Broncos if you like, fall off because teams have worked them out in regards to that surprise packet. Because these 3 teams here are always the top, obviously. So they know how to hold off the rest of the comp. They do know how to hold it off. So a lot of positives going into next year. Some slight concerns. The biggest issue for me is if they are going to go Toby Sexton long term, or they do want to go to the market to look for a 7 coming off contract, do they try... Are they in a win now mode? Not necessarily, but I think that you can... It depends on how the Bulldogs view themselves from within. They probably feel like they might be in a win now mode. They are definitely a team that I could see finishing in the top 4 next year. They are a team that I could see finishing here in the top 2. Does it happen? Not necessarily. We'll see how this off-season goes. But the 7 is the big issue there for the Bulldogs. Their attack is the big issue, which I believe comes down to the 7. And there just needs to be a bit more creativity. There just needs to be a bit more creativity from a game-managing halfback, in my personal opinion. But they did do well with Toby once they got rid of Drew Hutchinson in that starting 7, and that's when they started to see it. So, Dogs have got a 50-50 choice there to make, realistically. They do. They've got a big choice to make, because this is a roster that 1 through 6 is pretty guaranteed. Obviously, they'd be putting in Blake Wilson rather than Addo Carr based off of recent news, more than likely. Again, I don't know how that situation's unfolded just yet, but that 1 through 4 is solidified. The 6 is obviously solidified. And then, yeah, it comes down to Tobes. And the forwards needs a bit more beef in this front row, in my personal opinion. I think Sam Hughes is good off the bench. I don't think he's starting necessarily, but you don't need all this. You don't need all stars, man, in your forwards. This is a great back row. And then Kurt Mann's good in that 13. So, and you probably do actually win that finals game against Manly if Kurt Mann's there, to be completely honest with you. But yeah, massive pickup there. Massive pickup. Look, again, I'm excited to see what the Dogs do. I'm excited to see if they can break away from the pack of those teams that have improved and then dropped off. I'm excited to see if they can maintain that consistency. I'm excited to see if they can do it. Wary, but believing in the future. Because I do think their contract situation does set themselves up for success. But alright guys, I think that's going to do us here for today. I hope you have enjoyed. Obviously, if you agree, disagree, slightly disagree, if I've forgotten something, whatever, please drop it in the comment section. Let me know your thoughts. I'm eager to hear about it. Obviously, guys, hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe if you're new around here. We do appreciate all your support. Obviously, the off-season is coming up, and we've got some big-time videos to slap down before the off-season does does come around. But we are in finals time. We are excited and looking forward to see if the Doggies next year can keep up this momentum and can keep making their fans proud, loud, and passionate. But guys, like I said, thumbs up, subscribe. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Catch you later. See ya.